Hey guys, welcome back to another Genshin Impact video. Today we're going to be going over Xiangling, giving you a quick overview of her skills, talents, constellations, as well as talking about how she performs in the early game and the late game, and we'll be going over some potential item builds and artifacts and weapons for her as well. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe at the end. If you want to see more content, we do have more Genshin on the way, as well as Exo Heroes. So without further ado, let's get started. The first thing we need to understand about Xiangling is her skills and talents, so let's get started with that. Xiangling has a 5-part basic attack combo with the 3rd and 4th hit being 2 strikes and 4 strikes respectively. This is key to maximizing her DPS, so keep this in mind as we move forward into her build. Her charge attack has a slight wind-up time and then she dashes forward through her enemies. Her elemental skill is one of the cuter ones in the game, Guoba attack, where she summons Guoba, the panda, to eat spicy peppers and breathe fire on her enemies for AoE pyro damage. The cooldown is a little long at 12 seconds, but the damage is respectable and Guoba will auto-target enemies, so it's not too bad. Pyro Nado is Xiangling's elemental burst, and it's another key part of her DPS. She'll summon 3 flaming spears that circle around her and deal pyro damage to all enemies hit. The range of Pyro Nado is actually quite a bit out from Xiangling's body compared to Kaya's elemental burst where the icicles are much closer. The Pyro Nado will last for 10 seconds with the 20-second CD and 80 energy cost. Xiangling's consistent damage means that a decent number of the elemental particles and orbs will be dropping, which helps offset the high cost. At Ascension 1, Xiangling gets Crossfire, which increases the flame range of Guoba by 20%. And this might not sound like much, but that 20% can actually be the difference between tagging an enemy with Pyro or not, and getting that status off is important. At Ascension 4, we have another talent tied to Guoba, and that's Beware It's Super Hot. This passive has Guoba leave a chili pepper on the ground after he disappears, and any character who eats that pepper gets 10% increased attack for 10 seconds. This talent is especially useful for buffing whoever your main DPS is, whether that be Fischl, Diluc, or Xiangling herself. Everyone's going to enjoy 10% more attack. Her non-combat passive, Chef de Cuisine, makes it so that whenever Xiangling cooks an attack-boosting dish, she has a 12% chance to receive double the product. This is just a nice little buff if you're looking to cook attack buff food, so no reason not to use her for it. Moving on to her constellations, at level 1, she gets Crispy Outside, Tender Inside. This means that enemies hit by Guoba's attacks have their pyro resistance reduced by 15% for 6 seconds. This is good for buffing her own damage, where her skill and burst are heavy pyro damage, as well as a potential pyro swap-in with Diluc or Klee. At level 2, she gets Oil Meets Fire. The last attack in a normal attack sequence applies the Implode status onto the enemy for 2 seconds. An explosion will occur once this duration ends, dealing 75% of Xiangling's attack as pyro damage. This is actually one of her more useful constellations, and this is because one of the weaknesses of Xiangling is her relatively high cooldowns, especially on her E, which make it difficult for her to consistently get pyro off, especially if the enemies are spread out over a wide area. So by having pyro application applied through her basic combo, this makes it a lot more reliable in getting the pyro status off on your enemies. Constellation 3 is Deep Fry, and this increases the level of Pyro Nado by 3, maximum upgrade level is 15, not much to talk about there. Slow Bake is her 4th constellation, and this increases Pyro Nado's duration by 40%. This is huge. I mean, Pyro Nado already lasts, honestly, a pretty long time, and because it's such a big contributor to her damage, having it on the field for 40% longer is great for DPS Xiangling as well as support Xiangling. Her 5th constellation, Guoba Mad, increases the level of Guoba attack by 3, basically same thing as Deep Fry, but this time for her skill instead of her burst. Her 6th constellation, Condensed Pyro Nado, makes it so that for the duration of Pyro Nado, all party members receive a 15% pyro damage bonus. This, again, is great for boosting her own damage if you're running her as your main DPS, but also allows more of a supportive Xiangling playstyle where you could swap out to someone else and they still get the bonus while Pyro Nado's running. So now let's talk about her early to mid game. Here we would rate her an 8 out of 10. Her role at this stage of the game is to be an amazing DPS, and one that the game gives you for free once you complete Spiral Abyss 3-3. Now if you've been doing polls, you might already have a Xiangling, but in case you don't, just know that she's a solid freebie. She can be flexed as a support or main DPS, but most of the time you'll be seeing her used as the damage carry for the team, and we'll go into detail about why. Our build recommendations: Xiangling has some flexibility depending on if you want her as support or DPS like we mentioned. We'll be going over both choices here so you could choose based on your playstyle. Let's start out with support Xiangling. So both her skill and burst persist after swapping out, so we would want to focus on keeping higher uptime on those abilities to maximize the support potential she has without being active on the field. With that in mind, artifacts like Exile with the 2 set bringing 20% energy recharge is already quite useful, but then on 4 set, when Xiangling uses her burst, every other party member gets 2 energy every 2 seconds for 6 seconds. Now this isn't a crazy amount of regen, but it is useful since you'll be swapping out anyways, and it allows the main carry to do more damage and everybody else to get their elemental burst up a little bit faster. Xiangling herself will get energy through the Exile passive and elemental particles gathered by the other characters. If you want to go all in with energy recharge, you could run 2 Exile and 2 Scholar for 40% total. These artifacts focus on getting the highest Pyronado uptime possible, and then using that to synergize with whoever the main carry is that you're swapping into. Since Pyronado does pyro damage, it would probably work best with melee electro carries like Razor, Beidou, or Keqing. Now let's talk about weapons, and here's where it gets interesting. If we stick with the 3-star options first, White Tassel is going to be your best bet for DPS Xiangling, with the crit rate substat benefiting from her fast attack speed and the straight 24% normal attack damage increase. This all sounds great, and it is, but the weapon drops from chests, and I personally have never seen one. So if you found one in the wild, then you should go for it, but for the rest of us, probably stick with Halberd. If you somehow haven't gotten either of these, no worries, because there's a 4-star option that's potentially the best weapon for her, and anyone can get it. And that is Crescent Pike. So the way this works is, after picking up an elemental particle, your normal and charge attacks will deal an additional 20% of your attack as damage for 5 seconds. Now the wording is a little bit confusing here, but luckily Burbles on Reddit has broken it down for us, and we're going to link the post in the description. Essentially, after picking up an elemental particle, which happens often enough to have close to 100% uptime, each strike you make will have an extra attack added on top of that deals 20% of your total attack. Remember when we talked about how the 3rd and 4th part of her combo were 2 and 4 strikes respectively? Well, each of those individual strikes counts as an attack. So this 20% effect will proc 2 and 4 times for those hits, meaning way more passive damage than advertised. And as if that weren't enough, each of the extra attacks can crit independently from the basic attack that it was tied to. And in case you're thinking, wow, this weapon is amazing, how do I get it? Well, it's actually one of the few craftable weapons in this game. So just visit a blacksmith in any town, and with 1 Northlander polearm prototype, and 50 crystal chunks and white iron chunks, you can make it yourself. This means free base weapon as well as free refinements. Basically, if you take one thing away from this video, let it be that Crescent Pike is currently OP and you should get one as soon as possible. Now, moving into the late game, I think Genshin actually does a pretty good job of not needing 5-star characters to do well at higher progression levels. And this is in part due to the fact that there are some really solid 4-star heroes. Xiangling is a perfect example. Let's break the endgame down into 2 types of content, domains and bosses. If we look at domains first, it might feel like Xiangling struggles in the type of content because she's melee and not a claymore user, so she doesn't get those wide sweeping attacks, and might have trouble keeping up with killing all the mobs. But this is not the case. Xiangling has crazy high damage potential, especially if you manage to get a few constellations under her belt. So once you get to the higher level floors, where you're going to be fighting Fitsui Vanguards and Legionnaires, her high single target DPS is going to come in handy. Naturally, this also carries over to bosses like the Regivines and Hypostasises, and of course weekly bosses as well. So let's go over some potential build recommendations. While Xiangling was already decent with the earlier artifacts, the higher tier stuff is really going to let her reach her max potential. We're talking about sets like Gladiator's Finale for the 18% attack and 35% normal attack damage. If you're still wanting to run support Xiangling at this point, then Noblesse Oblige is always going to be good for the elemental burst damage and the increased party member attack. If you're really set on committing to support Xiangling and have no dedicated pyro users like Klee, then you could also run the Crimson Witch of Flames to focus the damage on her abilities. Of course, it would be a while before you're running around with 4 sets of higher tier pieces with good substats, so until you get to that point, it's totally workable to mix and match with 2-piece sets. For instance, Gladiator, Sojourner, and Braveheart all give the 2-piece 18% attack buff. So just find the 2 with the best substats and run with those until you could snag 4-piece Gladiator. For weapons, to be honest, the 5-star polearms are pretty stacked. Thinking about how they would work with Xiangling, all of them are good. Obviously, if you luck out and get a 5-star weapon, you should definitely try it out to see how it feels, but if we look at all 3 objectively, they seem to excel at different things. The Jade Wing Spear, because of the crit rate secondary and stacking effect bonus, feels like it's going to be the ideal sustained DPS polearm. If you're confident you can keep hitting things every 6 seconds, then Jade Wing Spear takes the top spot. Skyward Spine has amazing passives with the immediate increase to crit rate and attack speed, along with the 40% AoE on basic attack every 2 seconds. This is probably going to be better suited for shorter engagements, since the buffs are immediate and the Vacuum Blade portion of the passive will probably trigger for more upfront damage. Last but not least, Kunwu's Iris Rift. In my opinion, this is the coolest looking of the 3, but sadly also the one with the lowest base attack. Iris Rift sits somewhere in between the 2 previously mentioned polearms in that it does give you immediate buffs of 10% attack speed and 24% damage increase versus elemental afflicted enemies. So you're getting value right away instead of needing to build stacks, but at the same time it's geared more towards DPS and not burst, with the higher attack speed and damage modifier. Either way, you can't go wrong with any of them, but in case you don't have any of them, you can always stick with your level 70 plus 5 refined Crescent Pike. Finally, to give Xiangling an overall free-to-play value score, it would be a 9 out of 10. You can get her for free, she could flex both support and DPS roles depending on what you need, she has amazing synergy with a free obtain and refinable weapon, she's cute and has a fire-breathing panda partner, I mean, what's not to love? Xiangling is without a doubt one of the best free-to-play characters available right now. That does it all for this video, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, leave us a like and subscribe. As mentioned earlier, we are going to be releasing more character guides, more boss guides, Exo Hero stuff on the way as well. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.